Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hopefully, this webinar will be interesting. It'll be educational, hopefully a bit edifying, and maybe even a little bit, amusing, entertaining, just to make sure that it's not boring. With that in mind, the discussion is about modernizing performance management in 2018. And modernizing meaning really getting rid of the traditional legacy, outmoded approach that I will show you and actually prove to you on this webinar doesn't work. It's not that it's ineffective. It's actually pretty effective, but it's effective at the wrong thing. It's effective at hurting your company's performance, hurting your company's alignment, hurting your people at your company, and you'll see why. So with that, I also want to quickly introduce my own sort of background. It's not about my bio or who I am and that kind of stuff. It's really much more about the fact that I'm a business executive. Majority of the attendees and registrants for this webinar are experts and executives in the HR field, and I don't come from the HR side of things. I'm actually an operator, a business executive. I've helped build a couple of successful companies, or rather have been fortunate enough to be part of amazing teams of people and amazing companies that have become extremely successful. So everything that I talk about here is frankly much more from the operational perspective of managing performance at companies. It's really about how I've done performance management as a business manager, as a people manager. It's about how performance management is done by actual people managers. I mean, of course, managers means people managers, but just to be very clear, not project managers, people managers, executives, general managers, frontline managers. I come from that side of the world, not from HR, and I know what good performance management is that actually helps drive business forward, and what is the ineffective one, or the one that's effective at hurting the business. And I will share that to you from that perspective that hopefully sheds light on some best practices that HR can actually embrace in driving performance management in 2018, 2019 effectively at your company. So on our agenda, we're going to talk about four big things, but under them there will be three or plus points in each of these sections. First we'll talk about what is exactly performance management. There are so many floating definitions that we need to kind of cut through and just get to the right ones. We'll talk about the story, in fact, 100 plus years of history of traditional legacy, outmoded performance and performance management, and what is it really today. And that's all about the new and modern approach. And then we'll talk about the right way to do it, more sort of hands-on technical recipes. We're going to peel the onion a little bit about, a couple of aspects of the modern approach. So let's get going. Like I said, first we're going to get started with what is performance management. And I really like to use this slide from Burson by Deloitte. I think pretty much most of the HR executives and experts joining this webinar are very familiar with Josh Burson and Stacia Gar. They are globally renowned experts on HR, advanced technologies, the most relevant best practices of HR in the field today. And they have this great slide. What is performance management? Well, it's a set of management practices that, first of all, establish objectives for employees. By the way, a lot of companies don't do that. They don't establish objectives. If you don't have objectives, how can you possibly manage performance? With respect to what exactly are you managing performance if you don't have objectives in the first place? That's called flying by the seat of your pants. or sort of working in vacuum of any clear objectives. Sure as heck isn't performance management because you're missing that first key component. The next is assessing the attainment of such objectives. And by the way, not assessing people, but assessing attainment of the objectives. And then, of course, using that information to improve performance. But most importantly, and this is where I have this arrow pointing to, it's just management. Most importantly, performance management is management. And I emphasize that specifically because I want to make it clear that all the people managers out there, they want to embrace and do performance management because they are, in fact, managing people, right? A lot of times, and we'll talk a little bit about this throughout this presentation, many people think that performance management is just an HR pain. Hey, it's an HR problem. Let HR just run with it. Well, that's so unfair, right? HR is supposed to help make it happen. HR makes it conducive to run performance management correctly and effectively, but it's not a problem of HR. Performance management is what managers are brought into companies to do effectively, right? HR helps support it, helps everyone embrace it, helps train managers in doing it correctly, right? Helps managers do management. That's what performance management is ultimately all about. So it's not an HR's problem. It's the whole company's, the tool for the whole company, and it's everyone's problem to solve and do effectively. So in Wikipedia, performance management, of course, is defined as activities that include goals are consistently being met in effective and efficient manner, process by which organizations align their resources, systems, and employees to strategic objectives, right? So the goals piece, and I'm emphasizing this, is actually a very critical tip of the spear in having correct performance management. Can't manage or do performance management without first having objectives. So that's a big theme, right? And the other big theme, as we talked about on the prior slide, it's about improving performance, and we'll touch on that a little bit more and more here. So 100+ years of traditional performance management. Well, so let's go back in time to 1887. The Federal Civil Service Commission began using the performance merit rating system, right? 1914, around the start of World War I, Lord and Taylor introduces performance appraisals as an organizational tool. And many companies in the early 20th century were actually influenced by Frederick Taylor's performance management approach, which was emphasizing appraising people and really identifying poor performers. That was the main goal, which really just means not improving any performance, just identifying poor performance. That's it. Excuse me. So World War I to World War II, the U.S. military uses this merit rating system to dismiss poor performers. That was the main objective of this. During the 1940s, 2/3 or majority of the U.S. companies use these performance systems to just assess and document poor performance. Again, it's all about poor performance. And then during World War II, the U.S. Army also used forced rankings to assess the potential of soldiers. Again, who are the poor performers? And this is World War I, World War II. This is, a little bit while back. What's really kind of funny, sort of comical here, is that there's a ton of companies that still use that system right now, today. They just still focus on all about poor performers. And that's a huge, huge miss. That's pretty ineffective. So let's fast forward to 1980s. Jack Welch at GE champions this performance system to reward the top 20%, but dismiss the bottom 10%. Again, the emphasis on poor performers. 1990s and 2000s, we see this McKinsey study that was very famous in the HR world that emphasizes the need for actually developing talent and rewarding performance. So now kind of this other side of the coin, the flip side, right? And this is an early beginning of a modern approach. It took a while, right? But this approach in transitioning from assessments towards developing talent, towards improving talent. And then 2010s, we're starting to see this emergence of this new system, the continuous performance management, which is not about finding poor performers. But this movement is basically based on research from the past decade, which includes McKinsey and a number of other research studies that came out about focusing more on continuous process, not once a year, and certainly not just twice a year either. That's not a fix for once a year. And that's kind of funny because a lot of companies do it twice a year now. We'll talk about that, and they think that's the fix. It's totally not. Rather than this kind of once a year annual and focus on performance improvement and development of your talent rather than just appraisals. And now the past 5 or 6 years have been the most profound in this space. Now, performance management is top 5. I don't have a slide on this, but Burson Deloitte actually said top 5 categorical issues and priorities for HR today for best practices, right? Last 5 or 6 years, many global leaders began officially announcing their major shift to modern performance management. And that's kind of 100 plus years in a nutshell. And a lot of you probably have been reading, so going back in history in the best, decade or so, books that are coming out exactly laser focusing on this topic of abolishing this traditional system. Mary Jenkins here writes in this book, it's one of the most popular books on the topic, is for many people the whole idea of not doing them, which means these traditional outdated annual once a year performance appraisals that are really just appraisals, evaluations, not performance improvement tools, right? Appraisals, evaluations, identifying poor performers, stacked rankings. So for many people the whole idea of not doing them is almost like irresponsible, right? And we'll actually have another similar phrase from a former VP of HR at Medtronic. It's one of my last slides in the presentation, where she talks about how she was doing the transition, and a lot of her peers were considering this exactly like irresponsible. It's a sacred cow. You can't not do it. But she makes a point of how dumb that is, and what she actually did and how much better it is. Here's another book, The End of Performance Review. And this really means this is not the end of continuous performance process. It's the end of this outdated version of the performance review that happens once a year. Dr. Tim Baker writes, I wrote this book because so many managers and employees told me that they dread the performance review and thought it is a waste of time. By the way, it's interesting. He said managers. He didn't just say employees. He said managers who have to do this. Then you've probably seen these articles in Harvard Business Review. Now, Harvard Business Review, it's not focused on best practices and thought leadership exclusively for HR. It's overarchingly for operating successful companies. Some of the best leaders in the world, managers of every kind, read the Harvard Business Reviews, the best practices, the best thought leadership on how to effectively manage companies, whether it's finance or marketing or it's HR. It's all of the above. But here on the cover, they have reinventing the performance system, right? And in another article, also in Harvard Business Review, again, targeting all kinds of executives, not just HR, all kinds of executives, and they're all reading this. The Performance Management Revolution, right? Harvard Business Review writes about this. Again, not an HR-focused publication for best practices overarchingly and holistically for companies, right? And yet they are very focused on performance management revolution. It is that important, not just for HR, for everyone who's a leader, a manager. There's an article about Adobe that became extremely famous, about Donna Morris, who's a role model in HR. She's a real thought leader. She was one of the first people out there in the HR world at large. She was at Adobe, and she basically noticed that the annual performance review, a central part of human resources job, right, that she's been hired to do, she says wasn't much of a resource to the humans it served, right? It's a very funny way to put it. And she talks about how at one point the planning alone took 9 months, and she joked that it was like preparing to give birth to a child. So it's an extremely time-consuming thing. Adobe calculated that the annual process for them, and granted they're a larger company, etc., but look, it's all ratable, right? It's all commensurate, like with your company size. But it took them 80,000 hours of time from its 2,000 managers, 40 hours per manager per year. That's an entire week just to take notes and update the files to submit for the performance review. This is crazy, right? Deloitte said that they tallied up all the hours the organization was spending on performance management, and they said it consumed close to 2 million hours a year. 2 million hours a year. Let's put this in perspective just for laughs and giggles. This is equivalent to 50,000 work weeks. Yeah, so basically, take 2 million, divided by 40 hours. That is equivalent of a week, a work week. Of course, a lot of us work more, right? But let's call it just a standard work week, right? 50,000 work weeks, right? I mean, that's 1,000 years of work for a person. I cannot see your hands, but virtually do raise your hand if you think you can live 1,000 years. And then after the webinar, do me a favor, email me your secret recipe. I'd like to know how to do that. Who the heck lives 1,000 years to spend all that time to waste this 2 million hours? Or if it's really 1,000 people, that's a full year of work for 1,000 people working. It's just insanity. It's absolutely insane. It takes so much time to prepare for this process, which is completely ineffective. Washington Post writes, why must we continue to have these awkward conversations in which both sides try to recall what an employee accomplished like 12 months ago, right? Washington Post writes about this. Can you imagine? Again, Washington Post is also not for HR, right? It's a publication, right? It's general publication, probably more about politics than anything else. Yet they picked up on the performance problem. It is that prevalent. It is that profound, that important to every person with a job and every manager and every HR executive out there globally. Corporate Executive Board, which was acquired by Gartner recently, says that 95% of managers are completely dissatisfied with their company's performance review and management systems, right? 95 out of 100 managers at any average company. And they also said 90% of HR professionals. So even HR executives and professionals don't believe that their company's performance reviews provide any accurate information, right? This is where we have to ask, like, why are we doing this? 58% of executives of any given company, according to Burson by Deloitte, say that the current performance system does not drive employee engagement and doesn't drive higher performance. That's about 60% of executives out there. So the executives of your company, 60% of them, are basically saying the same thing if you actually ask them. And geez, I mean, what are they thinking in the backs of their minds if this is actually happening and that's how they feel? Right? Because they're all in HR on this. But 81% of employers say managers spend too little time in ongoing conversations with employees about performance. Right? 8 out of 10 employers, 8 out of 10 employers, companies say that. 62% of these companies of employers say that their managers spend insufficient time helping employees set objectives. That's some serious flying by the seat of your pants, right? That's not efficient or effective to be managing people like that at any company. 63% of employers say that the managers spend 4 hours or less per employee on performance management per year. In a whole year, 2,000 plus hours per year, only 4 hours per employee spent by managers. Managers are people hired and paid by the company to manage other people, and yet they spend doing 4 hours of a core function of their job, because performance management, as we learned earlier, is management. You're managing performance and trying to improve it. 4 hours per year. That's it. Incredible, right? So former senior vice president of people at Google, Laszlo Bock, very well known in the HR world, very respected. He said performance management, as practiced by most organizations, has become a rule-based, bureaucratic process existing as an end in itself rather than actually shaping performance or improving it, right? He said employees hate it. We know that. Managers hate it. Even HR departments hate it. Why are we doing this? So I cannot see your hands, as I said earlier, but please do virtually lift your hand if you're an HR leader and your company is still doing these once a year, or by the way, even twice a year, performance or semi-annual even performance reviews. Semi-annual, annual, same thing. Potato, right? They are ineffective, right? The way they're done is ineffective. and we'll talk about what is effective shortly. But look, Brookings Institute and SHRM, I think a lot of you are members of SHRM from the HR world, right? The total cost of your workforce is 70%. Of the total amount of money you're investing every year on your financial statements, right? You look up your income statement, P&L, 70% of that total, you're spending $100 million, 70 million of that is your people, right there. If they are managed as ineffectively as the statistics show that we just looked at, as everyone is complaining, as 95% of managers are dissatisfied with, right, and all these employers and companies are not happy with, you're spending 70% on your people, and yet they're being managed completely ineffectively with something that totally doesn't work. It hurts performance, right? So why effective HR leaders and teams are transitioning away from that? It's ineffective, right? If it's the only thing you do, like the once a year thing or twice a year thing, if you're not doing it as a continuous process, and we'll talk about it more carefully shortly, if all you're doing is the once a year or the twice a year thing, it's a waste. It's a completely ineffective waste. Or if it's effective, it's only effective at hurting your company. Once a year just doesn't work, neither does only twice a year. Does not focus on developing your people and talent. It's just evaluating for the most part. Like really, peel the onion. It's nothing is being done within those conversations. I guarantee for most of you, you can probably agree to it. Maybe some of you do have, specific coaching training for managers on how to do this effectively. But if it's a traditional process, it's not developing people. It's not developing talent. It's not meant to coach and improve performance. It's just assessing. That's really the outcome of it. Even if your intention is to do the improvement of the performance, truth be told, a lot of your managers may not have even been, paying attention or getting the right sort of insights out of the training you're offering them, and may still be just doing the evaluation or assessment piece. So let's now talk about the modern approach. So, we've talked about the old approach. We talked about the 100+ years of history. We know it doesn't work. Let's talk about the modern approach that does work, right? And after this section, after summarizing all this and looking at some of the, research and, some of the insights from Harvard Business Review and Forrester and Burson by Deloitte, and here some quotes from Donna at Adobe and from GE, we'll then have a section about the right way to do continuous performance management. So let's get going. So look, what is your goal, right? With doing performance management, what's the goal? Is it to evaluate people or is it to improve performance? Well, we know it's to improve performance. Part of improving performance, you want to evaluate where the progress is at. No question about it. But that's not the end result you're seeking. You're trying to get improved performance, right? So yes, part of it is evaluation assessment, but that's just a stepping stone to improving performance. And that means a world of difference in the way that your performance management process is done. The switch is pretty significant, right? The way that it's done, the way it's prepared, the frequency. We'll talk about all of the steps that need to be taken to transition away from the legacy approach to the modern. So how has performance management been used traditionally? We talked about it. It's been viewed as an HR problem, not a corporate tool. Hey, HR, go just do it, because we know that's just a checkbox on the list. No, it's not. It's not a checkbox for HR. HR's aim is to improve people operations, to improve performance, to be strategic to the company. It's not to do a checkbox like a lot of people think. That's incorrect. The legacy approach was used to just evaluate. We talked about it. It did not focus on improving, just assessing, evaluating, and didn't have any continuous flow to it. Burson by Deloitte said that more than 60% of all companies are now redesigning or have already begun redesigning their performance management, right? In fact, there's a statistic from SHRM that 10% of Fortune 500, the top 500 companies, right, they already made the transition, 10%. And that was a couple of years ago. I think by now it's happening with a lot more companies. In fact, there's a statistic from Harvard Business Review, the Performance Management Revolution article, that 1/3 of U.S. companies are really seriously, HR departments and executives there are taking this very seriously to start transitioning away as quickly as possible. So that train has, in many ways, for many companies, already left the station and they're going forward. Forrester said that going forward, employee performance will be transformed to deliver results using continuous methods, not once a year. And by the way, definitely not twice a year. I've heard companies say, "Oh, we're not doing the annual review anymore. We're doing semi-annual." It's like, oh my God, you completely missed the point. That's not that's not the key difference, right? Continuous doesn't mean twice a year, right? It's like working out. It's you don't do it once a year, you don't do it twice a year. If you don't do it continuously, that's not going to help you. So continuous methods, and they also said advanced technologies, meaning you don't do just extra paperwork or a ton of emails that are unnecessary, and spend those 2 million hours that we talked about at Deloitte, or 80,000 hours at Adobe. No, there are technologies that significantly shave that administrative wasted downtime from doing those unnecessary tasks, and automates a lot of things, right? By the way, that's what we do, right? We do that. But this is not about our product. This is about the concepts, right? Use the technology to make your company much more effective, much more efficient, and to make HR much more strategic to improve the people operations, right? Not just do a checkbox that some people incorrectly perceive it to be. Harvard Business Review, in the Reinventing Performance Management article, said once a year goals are too batched for a real-time world. Conversations about year-end ratings are generally less valuable than conversations conducted in the moment, right? Continuously in the moment about actual performance. And by the way, in the moment doesn't mean literally every day you have to sit down and do these things. The reality is it could be once a week for 5 to 10 minutes, right? Through a technology, or maybe face-to-face, one-on-one, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, even an hour sometimes, with your direct reports for each manager. Or you can do it, anywhere between 1 and 4 weeks. We'll talk about it more shortly. But let's define what exactly is continuous. I keep saying that, and you keep hearing it. What is continuous? Well, a set of continuous progress check-ins, not just a once-a-year single event, and not twice a year, 2 single events. But these are continuous progress check-ins. Check-ins is now a term. It's a well-known it's a thing, it's a term, right? So it's part of the taxonomy of performance management, of HR, of managing people. So, and these are focused on developing your talent and improving performance, not just assessing, right? That's what continuous check-ins and progress check-ins or performance check-ins are all about. And again, Deloitte said that research demonstrates that organizations with this continuous focus, right, they have better employee, talent, and business results. This is for real. This works, right? It's effective. So Donna Moore is going back to her. She's a real role model that led this movement, along with a couple of pioneers. And she said swapping out this annual review in favor of this regular, ongoing, this continuous check-in allowed Adobe to have a lightweight process that served rather than distracted from people doing their best work. By the way, we saw in one of those earlier slides that when she started at Adobe, she was an HR professional, and she ultimately, in a couple of years of doing this and making such a huge positive impact on the people and the company, she was actually promoted to Senior Vice President of People at Adobe. And that's what she says. And listen, the point of lightweight is very significant. Put that in contrast, juxtapose that with that thought that they spent, what was it, like 50,000 hours or whatever it was, or 80,000 hours, right, of doing this administrative work for this once-a-year process. But the continuous piece, which is enabled and empowered by technology, it makes it extremely lightweight. It absorbs all the time you would otherwise waste tracking information and noting this information for this once-a-year or twice-a-year meeting. And instead, it really automates a ton of things. So the next thing is GE, right? GE was replacing performance reviews, and they said the world isn't really on an annual cycle anymore for anything, right? That's why you get rid of this annual process. GE is moving toward continuous touch points between managers and employees, according to HR executive at GE. And hey, if GE is doing this, This is a global organization with hundreds of thousands of employees. How can more nimble companies not be doing this? So the other thing I want to talk about, besides the big concept of continuous versus non-continuous, is traditional and outdated approach. Also did another thing incorrectly. They took not just the once-a-year annual review, but they also combined it with once-a-year goals. Hey, here's your goal for the next 365 days. Go do it. We'll meet in 12 months. How's that going to help you run a company effectively or manage people? And then they also threw compensation into this mix, and it was like all collapsed into like one meeting, everything together. Whereas in reality, the modern meeting or process rather is it separates and makes these disparate, connected but separate conversations, right? So it's quarterly, mid-year, and annual meetings, right? Compensation is a separate conversation. And the goals and the management, agile goals like an OKR system, objectives and key results. I think every one of you knows OKRs. Google uses them. 500,000 people watch that famous Google video on the internet. It's on YouTube. If you want, on our website, atiim.com, we've transcribed the whole video. It's 80 minutes long, so you can just skim the text. But, OKRs are these agile goals, right? They're really helpful. They're really simple and really align the company. You use that regularly in an agile manner and do it continuously in real time with check-ins. These three pieces are working together, but they're not combined into this one meeting like I showed you on a prior slide like this. It's not all one meeting. It's not all just directly linked to each other in one conversation. So the hottest and most disruptive area of HR today is the redesign of performance management, according to Deloitte Bersin. And who is doing it? All these companies and thousands and thousands and thousands more. World's best companies are doing it right now, right? So now, let's all of us take a moment and think about it. We've learned about the traditional approach. We know why it doesn't work. We are now going to focus on the right way to do this continuous performance management. How do you do that? Let's give you like a specific set of recipes, points, and also I'll talk about successful implementation, mistakes to avoid, a couple of myths about performance management and continuous performance management, all of the things that I hope will really help you out. And by the way, I apologize for the noise in the background. We have a big open space here, and I'm, as an executive, I commit to be in the same space with the entire team. So that's our people focus here. So listen, here's a quick thing here. The performance of your company is directly linked to the performance of your people, right? We all know that. A company is people, right? If people are performing, your company will perform. If they're not, your company's hurt, right? So there's an article in Harvard Business Review, another one, right on the cover. It's time to blow up HR and build something new. Whoa, let's not blow anyone up, Harvard Business Review. What are you talking about here? Well, it's really interesting article. It's, they talk about the new role for HR executives, for HR teams, HR departments, being much more strategic, right, to your chief executive officer. All of you in this webinar, a lot of you are in HR, right? And a lot of you are extremely strategic because the people and the people ops are really all in your hands, right? You can make that strategically better for your company. There's a couple quotes here. CEOs know that they depend on their company's HR to achieve success. Businesses don't create value. People do, right? That's HR. That's strategic. Elevating HR requires totally redefining the work content of the chief human resources officer, right? And by the way, really, to me, all of HR, every director, manager in HR, every HR professional, right? Let's elevate HR and be more strategic, right? About improving the company. The CEO and executives, they care about results, right? They care about aligning their people to what really matters. It's that quote that I mentioned on the prior slide, that the performance of your company, right, that every executive and CEO and the board of directors cares about, is directly linked to the performance of your people. So next, Business will benefit from better management of not just its financial resources, but also its human ones. Again, it goes back to the prior slide that every company's results and performance, they're directly linked to your people's performance and results. Finally, HR should recommend ways to use human capital to create value, to unlock value and create value. And that all is linked to doing performance management more effectively. Performance management is management, enabling and empowering your managers at your company to ensure that they really manage the talent at your company more effectively so that it all links to better performance and results at all of your companies out there. Your leadership team, once we talked about it, alignment, focus on what really matters, right? That's part of alignment and setting objectives. Transparency and accountability of people's performance and progress towards their objectives that they need to achieve in order for the company to achieve its own top objectives. How about improving every people manager's effectiveness? The effectiveness of every manager at your company, right? Every manager at your company, when they're more effective at their job, that makes all the people under them much more effective. Because whenever a manager is ineffective, there are 10 people at your company under that manager that are being ineffective as a result of their manager being ineffective, right? That's a 10x multiplier and amplifier effect. Data-driven management, right? Decision making based on data, on objectives that need to be hit, not flying by the seat of your pants. And then increasing performance and achieving results. That's what your leadership team wants. You ask every CEO with respect to performance, they want to know, is everyone clear on their individual goals and how those link directly to the top corporate goals? Means, is everyone really focused and knows what they need to focus on? And is that connected to what really matters to the company? Can the organization measure everyone's performance objectively and consistently? Is our organization getting the performance it needs from our employees and teams? Can we get and use data to better understand performance and employee risks? The CEO cares about that deeply. The shift that's happening right now from traditional to a modern approach goes from the centralized HR-led process, which, by the way, HR never necessarily wanted to just manage. You ask every great HR leader, all of you here on this webinar, right? You are trying to empower the people process. You're trying to make people unlock that value that we talked about from Harvard Business Review article, right? You're not trying to centralize this process. You're trying to enable it, support it, right? Empower it. And that is exactly what this modern process is about. It's localized to each manager to run with their people, to do the continuous performance check-ins with their people on their team. But you in HR, you enable that. You empower that. You make it happen successfully. You help implement the technology that makes it possible and makes the managers want to use it, makes them want to be engaged in the process and not feel like it's a burden that's placed on them. The next thing is traditionally was assessment evaluation. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but now it's all about developing people and improving performance. It's no longer top down, set the goals. It's bidirectional, meaning that localized with managers. Managers work with employees to come up with objectives that both, like tapping into the collective wisdom of the team. What objectives should we be focused on that align directly to what really matters to our team and to the objectives of our company overarchingly, right? You work as a team to come up with those. It's bidirectionally, approved, not acquiesced to, but actually approved and reviewed by the manager, but with the help of the employees. And again, technologies like ours enable that process to be fluid and simple and easy and lightweight and aligned and easy to understand. It used to be compliance focused. Now it's not about compliance, really. It's about improving performance. Open to critical biases like the recency bias. Hey, it's at the end of the year or at the end of 6 months, each person just remembers about the employee what happened recently, not throughout the time. Well, now it's much more. It's less biased. It's much more objective, not subjective. It's measurable because you have objectives that you give feedback on, that you check in on regularly. It's totally different. Not annual. It's continuous, right? It's not a formal appraisal and review. It's actually progress check-ins with coaching. And yeah, of course, you still have the more formal quarterly or semi-annual and annual once a year. All of those combined, they're still continuous formal ones. A lot of our customers globally, they actually have these continuous weekly check-ins that managers do, or bi-weekly. We have some larger clients that have managers do the short 5 to 10 minute check-ins every 2 weeks. But then those are all added together, and then you wrap those up in a summarized format every, say, 6 months, right? But it's not just every 6 months or just once a year. It's all actually founded and standing on top of the foundation of these continuous check-ins. And that is completely different. Just doing something twice a year or once a year standalone doesn't work. Doing that as a formal summary process of the continuous touch points, that's a completely, entirely, utterly different process altogether. And that does work, right? And just, you don't focus on just big wins. You focus on small celebrations. It comes out of the book called The Progress Principle by Professor Teresa Amiable at Harvard Business School. And it's not just one-way feedback, top-down. It's two-way feedback, communication between manager and employee. The other thing is, a key insight is that goals combined with feedback, not just, hey, here are your goals, go do them, or here are your goals, where do you stand on them? No, it's feedback. As an HR executive, as an HR professional, as an HR guru, you all are training your managers to be more effective, and training them, teaching them, and educating them that you need to set objectives, but also provide regular strengths-based feedback on that. And that, when combined together, increases performance. Just goals is one thing, but when you combine with feedback and systematize it, right? Make it a system, make it consistent, codify it, make sure it's getting done. When you combine those, it increases performance. Donna Morris, coming back to her, says that continuous feedback is difficult to sustain if it's not happening organically, meaning if it's not happening, if the managers are not given the technology to enable it to do it easily and simply locally by managers and employees, but of course can be overseen, administered, supported, and empowered by HR. HR can see the reports of who's doing what. They get the data. They oversee that it's done correctly. They can look at these weekly check-ins and kind of monitor and coach the managers, but it has to be done by the managers. It has to be really a technology that notifies the managers, hey, it's time to do it. The scheduled time is up. Let's go, right? And that needs to happen, and it was happening at Adobe without HR's prompting. The key insight, localized continuous process with the people managers, with managers, right? It must be owned by that, but supported, empowered, and administered. And by the way, trained to do effectively, all by HR, not just owned and launched by HR, right? Like traditionally, when HR just says, hey, all the managers, go do it. No. That doesn't work. Managers they won't feel the sense of ownership, won't be engaged. The next important thing is recognition and rewards. Quick stats. When you're doing that, the employee performance can increase. When you're doing that as part of the employee performance, you can increase employee engagement by like 60%. And Gallup says, listen, employee recognition increases productivity, retention, profit, and customer satisfaction. It helps all of that across the board. Now let's talk really quickly. Recipe, 5 steps. We have 15 minutes left. We're going to run through this and be done. So number one, agile goals. Agile means that you can quickly create them. You can align them. It's not heavy-duty goals that are once a year. They're quarterly. You're checking in on them weekly, 12 times per quarter. You can even update them very easily. You can see how the progress bar moves. You can feel how the progress is being made. You can connect to what really matters to the company and see how your work and your efforts connect to what truly matters to your organization. And there are, I think, 700 or 800 of you on this webinar. Let's, all let that sink in, right? All of your companies, hundreds of these companies here, you can actually ensure that your managers are setting clear objectives that connect employees to what really matters, makes them feel how their work impacts the company, and see the progress move. Progress check-ins happen weekly, right? Regularly. Or by the way, on the next slide, we can talk about how you can do it. If you don't want to do it weekly, you can do it, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks. The bigger the company, I typically see the executives think that people want to do it only every 4 weeks. But what we also find is they start doing it this once a month check-in. It's only 5 to 10 minutes. They see the power of it. They see how much alignment it brings, and they begin to transition to doing it weekly. It's only 5 to 10 minutes. It's nothing, but the power that it creates is incredible. Feedback. We talked about combining feedback with goals. Um, 4, recognition and rewards. Very critical. When a manager recognizes, when peers recognize each other, even in our product, we have this 365 feedback that actually enables you not only to say something positive and give some feedback to your colleague, or not only for you to request feedback from someone that you can automate, right? But you can actually do it based on things like corporate values. So if you have 5 or 10 corporate values, you can actually select people and which corporate values they embrace and embody and exemplify. And that's really powerful feedback that ties people to the company's mission, right? That's your continuous performance management, these 5 steps with data in the center of it, telling HR and telling managers what's really happening, data-driven decision making. So how do these progress check-ins work? By the way, these progress check-ins happen regularly, right? And the more formal, you can do quarterly or every 6 months, which means you still do one at the end of the year, the annual and the 6 month in, sort of mid-year check-in. Those can only work effectively when they're standing on the foundation of these regular check-ins. Otherwise, again, going back to all those statistics, they're ineffective or they just hurt your company. Each check-in starts with looking at progress and feedback on goals. That's kind of like either a one-on-one meeting or through a technology weekly check-in on a Friday. That's how our product, you can set it up and do it any day, but usually people prefer Friday at the end of the week. You get help from the manager to overcome any issues or roadblocks. In our product, there's a concept of this like pulse report, weekly status pulse report, where every employee gets to be asked a question in combination with goal metrics of, hey, any roadblocks or problems that you want to communicate to me, your manager. You always include constructive strength-based feedback, coaching, talent development, training conversations, and any other day-to-day activities. And it happens, every 1 to 4 weeks throughout the quarter. If it's every 1 week, 12 times per quarter, 12 to 13 times per quarter, 5 to 10 minutes each check-in. It's light. This is what it looks like in a product. This is a screenshot from our product. Basically, you have this goals progress bar. You can click and update it. This is your weekly pulse check-in, performance progress check-in with your manager. And your manager gets to see it. They can respond to you, right? This feedback, almost like in Facebook. You can click on good job, which is this like first icon. That's your, part of their recognition of, hey, great work on this objective. You're in the green at this stage in time. There's a different piece, which is this feedback, where you can request feedback from someone or just give feedback to someone. You can make it private, and you can click on company values that people embody. It's extremely powerful, extremely powerful. Moving on, best practices for successful implementation. 1 is localize it. We talked about it. Make managers use it. Use the technology. That is the best way you can do it, right? It's inexpensive, but super effective, efficient, saves the time. To make it engaging to managers to use, make it easy for them, etc. Managers and employees do this regularly. That's key for success. It should be strengths-based, right? Constructive feedback. HR, of course, needs to train managers how to do that, right? Make it a system. It has to be focused on the strengths. There's a ton of research on that. And coaching on improving things is done without criticism. It's constructive, right? Focus on improving performance throughout. Again, HR needs to train that, not just evaluate it, not just here's where you're at, here's what your compensation is going to be. It's all about having in mind how to improve the performance of people. Again, HR's training plays a key role in doing this effectively. And of course, recognition is very critical. Pitfalls and mistakes, if you're doing continuous performance management irregularly, it's not continuous, right? People who say we do this performance review not once a year, but twice a year, throw that out. That's just totally ineffective. That's not continuous. That's a mistake, right? It's a wrong way to do it. Make managers and employees use a traditional HR system, HRIS, that are 99.9% of not at all doing. They're not doing continuous. They're not developed for managers to use. They're developed for HR to run it. That's exactly the opposite of what the modern continuous performance management is. The user experience is not made for managers. Your managers will hate it. They're not going to use it, and you will not have succeeded as that strategic HR that we talked about from Harvard Business Review article that talks about making HR different today. Dropping the annual review completely. No, it's a piece of the puzzle. is just one of the summary reviews that stands on top of the continuous foundation, right? You don't just like not do the review at the end of the year. You probably will do, four every quarter or every 6 months, more formal summary snapshots. That's what it is, right? And a quick facelift to an annual review, like doing it twice a year, totally the wrong step. And then three biggest myths, and we're almost finished. We're almost there. And then we'll wrap it up with a couple of interesting slides. Performance management doesn't matter. Yes, it does, and I'll tell you why in a couple of slides. A very powerful statement from a book. Performance management is an HR thing. No, it's not. It's a corporate best practices system that actually works well. It's management. HR is not the only one who should be responsible for it to be done effectively. HR, again, empowers, trains on doing coaching effectively, brings in the right technology that drives real strategic results for your company. That's what HR does. Administers it, helps configure and set it up, helps train people, and makes it engaging inside the company, right? But it's not a problem of HR. It's a problem, but hopefully actually even a solution to a problem for the entire executive team, management team, and the whole organization, with HR spearheading the best practice. And managers don't really care about performance management. Sure, they do. We talked about earlier, Deloitte said performance management is simply management. How can managers not care about management? That's what they're paid to do, right? If they don't do it, they're hurting everyone under them, all the 10 people under them. So wrapping up with a few more slides, I told you earlier about, an HR executive for Medtronic, $16+ billion company at the time, Caroline Stockdale. She made the transition, right? She was one of those pioneers with Donna Morris at Adobe, among others, in the earlier stages of this past decade of this transition and transformation in HR. And she said, look, because the typical performance review didn't work. It's like you're demotivating people and poking them in the eye with a sharp stick. That's a very interesting and profound and provocative illustration, but it really is, right? When she told other HR peers at HR conferences and trade shows that she did this, she heard a lot of this, I'd love to, but I don't know. And she said it's like a sacred cow, right? It's almost like that quote from a book that you can buy on Amazon, that HR executives that are stuck in this traditional mod, this approach, they're stuck in that mod, and they think it's almost irresponsible if you don't do it, this annual performance review standalone. No, if you do it, you're hurting the company, period. There's no better way to put it. It's all these statistics prove that already. It's not a hypothetical. It's not a theory. It's not academic. It's practical, pragmatic, real-world problem, right? Hurts your company, period. However, fears about the transformation that all these peers have had when she shared it, they've been completely unfounded. All the things that they fear that if you don't do it this traditional way, it will not be good, completely unfounded. In fact, if anything, it made her company far better. In addition, she said managers increased freedom in the performance evaluations, which means this localization, just empowered by HR, but not purely and exclusively managed and led and administered by HR. So it's actually led them to double the average merit increases for the company's real exceptional performers. So it has had a profound impact on the people that you really want to retain and not leave your company. So with that said, really quickly, if you want to learn about this continuous feedback, continuous performance, we have a couple of ebooks. One of our recent ebooks there on our website. Go to atiim.com with II. II in the word Atiim stands for including individuals. We just wanted a cool name, starting with letter A. When we started like 4 years ago. Go to resources, ebooks. You'll find this and other ebooks that will help you there. And to wrap up this webinar with the remaining 4 minutes, is this actually that truly important? Well, when you read this book, the Performance Appraisal book by an expert in this area, Dick Grote, he said yes, absolutely. When all is said and done, it is important. is the most powerful tool an organization has to ensure the achievement of strategic goals, to focus the energy of all the organization's members on the achievement of its mission, and to reinforce the importance of everyone's living up to the company's vision and values. It is that important. It is that strategic. It makes HR strategic for implementing it the right way to drive performance and results, right? To spearhead an effort that is important to the executive team, to the chief executive officer of all of your companies, to the board of directors. It impacts results, right? Makes all of the managers that you pay and the 70%, which is the total cost of your workforce, really like 10x more effective, right? The process defines communication and communicates your culture, your expectations, how managers behave. You read all this, I don't need to read this, but ultimately it improves performance, right? This right here is also from Deloitte. So super important, super strategic, makes HR really far more valuable in its strategic impact on all of your people, on your entire organization, and it's felt at the board level for the CEO, for the executive team. Truly strategic piece of the puzzle, the seat at the table for HR to make that impact, positive impact on the company. And with that said, I wanted to thank you all. Really appreciate your time here. And Holly, I'll hand it back over to you now.
All right, thanks so much, Zorian. Tons of information packed into those 58 minutes. We really appreciate it. So I believe we have time for one question, and this should be a shorter answer, so we'll go ahead and take just a minute for that. Zorian, how about a question from Karina? She asks, so what is the recommended number of hours a manager should spend with each employee per month, quarter, and year to discuss their performance and coach them a little bit?
Great question. Great question. So discussing performance is simply managing people. How much should a manager spend managing people? Well, in these particular conversations, without making this too obvious, but in these particular conversations, I would say this. Every week, the most effective managers on average, right, believe it or not, spend in one-on-one meetings getting to know the person, understanding their progress towards objectives, 1 hour. 1 hour per week per employee. So 40-hour week, or a lot of us work many more hours than that, but let's say a standard 40-hour week, right? You have 10 direct reports as a manager. You spend 25% of that week meeting one-on-one. In those meetings, a tremendous amount of value gets covered. Tremendous amount of coaching, helping keep people aligned to what matters to the company. But with that said, technology like our product, our technology, right, is enabling managers to do a quick 5 to 10 minute check-in, and then you can still have that one-on-one meeting for 25 or 30 minutes or even 15 minutes to cover anything else that's required. But the technology eliminates a lot of the time that may not be spent effectively and laser focuses on really what matters, objectives, uncovering bottlenecks and coaching, right? So hopefully that answers your question. The most effective managers, full-blown one-on-one meeting with direct report, 1 hour per week. If you want to use technology to enable them to have more time back, you could literally do it in just like 15 minutes per week, if you will. And that's it. Does that answer the question, Holly?
Yep, I think that gets the job done. And so we did get a really good number of questions submitted during the presentation. Folks will make sure that Zorian gets those questions and he can follow up with you at another time. We do appreciate everyone for being here today, and we'll wrap up with one reminder that this webcast has been approved for HR, CI, and SHRM credit. If you'd like to check out those credits for attending today's webcast, you can do so under your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. So for all of us here at HCI, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.